Hello everyone and welcome to some MiSTer FPGA news. This week we will be talking about Nintendo 64 CPU updates, new arcade core releases, AO486 FPU and CPUID information, and more. So let's get to it. Anton Gale showed off water ski running on the Taito System SJ core. It was also mentioned on the post that Alpine Ski still needs to have its protection bypassed. Anton then posted about bypassing the protection routine for Alpine Ski by referencing the method used in MAME. As a result, the game started running on the core. And it looks like a release of the core is imminent, as Anton announced to watch for a release on Twitter. The games to be included in the release are Alpine Ski, Bio Attack, Elevator Action, Highway Race, Jungle Hunt, and Jungle King. They are the same game. It was originally released as Jungle King, but due to a copyright dispute, the game was modified and re-released as Jungle Hunt. Pirate Pete, Space Cruiser, Space Seeker, Time Tunnel, Water Ski, and Wild Western. Later in the week, Anton posted an update that sound is now implemented. All four AY38910 sound chips are up and running, and a core release is just around the corner. I wouldn't be surprised if a core is available by the time you see this video. A user on the MiSTer FPGA forums made an interesting discovery for the AO486 core. User Lucage did some research on how CPU identification worked and noticed some odd behavior and compatibility problems. AO486 uses a CPUID instruction to identify its CPU. This instruction can be read by PC software, and when a program calls for this instruction, AO486 reports its CPU as MiSTer AO486. This instruction is also used on real CPUs to identify themselves. One issue that arises with using this instruction is that, according to Lucage, not all 486 CPUs had the CPUID instruction. Lucage did some testing on how the CPU is detected by various programs and noticed some compatibility issues with AO486. The memtest program does not currently work with AO486, and it even fails to show what CPU is detected. Also, the check CPU program spits out an unknown CPU vendor when ran in AO486. Lucage then changed the AO486 code for CPUID to output genuine Intel instead of MiSTer AO486. This has some significant consequences because after the change, memtest is now able to run and show that an 486 CPU is detected. Check CPU also detects a 486 SX CPU. So all is well now, right? The AO486 core should just have an option to change its CPUID. Not so fast, there's more. The CPUID instruction was introduced in the Pentium line of CPUs and later 486s. So to accurately detect a 486 CPU, software needs to resort to other methods for detecting 486s without the CPUID instruction. Lucage then removed the CPUID instruction altogether to see what happens. memtest now detects a Cyrix CPU. Lucage says this is because to detect CPUs before the CPUID instruction was implemented, software detected some unique behavior in CPUs that varied between vendors. In this case, a certain division instruction would modify a flag on Intel and AMD CPUs, but not on Cyrix CPUs. In AO486, the flag is unaffected, just like the Cyrix CPU. Therefore, we get a Cyrix CPU detection. But wait, there's more. A Cyrix CPU also has two registers that store the chip's CPUID information. So, if a program detects a Cyrix CPU, you are expected to have these two registers. The AO486 CPU does not have these registers, so the CPU will then be detected as some very rare Cyrix or Texas Instrument 486 variant that do not contain those registers. Not having these registers will also cause programs that expect Cyrix-specific behaviors to fail. Lucage then rebuilt AO486 to use a CPUID of genuine Intel so people can test programs that didn't work before. The RBF is available on the MiSTer FPGA forums, and a link will also be in the description. On the forum thread, user Bray's Tiger said that the program hardware info will hang in AO486, but with the new RBF, it now runs. I personally tested about 5 programs that don't run on AO486, but they still don't run with the new RBF. I still do plan on testing more software. If you also want to test software that you can't get to run in AO486, then you can download the modified RBF. Speaking of CPU stuff for AO486, user TO on Discord did some tests with an FPU emulator running in AO486. The CPU in AO486 does not have an FPU. That is a floating point unit, and it allows the CPU to accelerate floating point math operations. Some games and applications can either make use of or require an FPU. With an FPU emulator for DOS, you can run applications requiring the use of an FPU on CPUs that do not have one. Surprisingly to me, TO reported some applications having a significant boost using the FPU emulator, so it will also work on software where an FPU is optional. The emulator in question is QuakeWare's Q87. Here are some tests that user TO has done with it. For FX Fighter, the game runs very well with Q87. With Quake, the game runs, but it's not at all playable. Tomb Raider also runs but isn't playable like Quake. When I say isn't playable, it means that the frame rate is way too low to make the games enjoyable. Some applications that TO tested were Autodesk AutoCAD R12. It works fine and renders okay. The Arachne MS-DOS web browser. This program works without an FPU, but you get some significant speed ups when you use an FPU. More tests were done, and I'll provide a link to the Discord discussion if you want to join. A link to the emulator will also be in the description if you want to test your own applications. Hotego has released a beta core for Super Contra. At the moment, you can't flip the screen, but this will be sorted out as the core matures. As with most of Hotego's beta cores, they are first released privately to Patreon subscribers. As soon as the core is stable enough, it is available to the public. Core developer Javier has started scanning the PCB for the arcade game Breywood. This will help in the drawing process of the schematics, which will also help with developing an FPGA core. Breywood to me looks like what a Gauntlet sequel could have been. I instantly thought Gauntlet when I tried it out. However, it doesn't feel like a ripoff, but its own game. The game was known as Shackled outside of Japan. Pierco has officially released Kick and Run, an arcade soccer/football game. Update your MiSTer now to obtain the core. While fixing a CPU issue for Super Contra, Hotego found a new methodology to apply to the Neo Geo Pocket core. Hotego had originally planned to release the Neo Geo Pocket core last week, but a CPU issue prevented the release. Now the work debugging Super Contra looks to be helpful for other cores. Let's cross our fingers that the Neo Geo Pocket core will release soon. Pierco also mentioned that he's working on creating a custom ROM for Kiki Kaikai in 6801 assembler. This is because there is no known dump of the MCU. Kiki Kaikai is a 1986 shoot-'em-up game where you play as a shrine maiden who uses magic scrolls and a wand to fight ghosts and monsters in feudal Japan. It spawned the Pocky and Rocky series on the Super NES. For the N64 core, Robert has been mostly concentrating on the CPU part, which he says is the biggest bottleneck for an N64 FPGA core on the D10 Nano. This week, he was able to get the N64 system test to work on the core. This will help judge the state of the CPU for the core. Right now, the ALU test fully passed, which shows all kinds of 32-bit and 64-bit calculations are working. On Patreon, Robert goes over other parts of the CPU, giving us some info and results from the system test. It's a really good read. Later in the week, Robert posted that the first part of the rendering is now implemented in the core. We are actually getting 3D graphics now. This is via the N64 NICCC demo. Some stray pixels still remain, but this is an amazing milestone. The Juno First core is now outputting some sound. For now, it's only sound effects driven by the MCU through the DAC. Track 17 has announced that Demon's World is now playable on the Toplin 1 core by Darren O. You can read about the core's development work by Darren and Track 17 on the public Patreon post. If you're curious to know what the next core is, like and retweet the post so it could be announced. Work will also continue on the Mega System 1 core. You can obtain Demon's World by enabling the CoinOp collection database in the Update All script. And other miscellaneous MiSTer fixes and updates are, for the C64 core, Ocean Type 2 and Gmod 2 cartridge support was added, thanks to Michael Jorgensen. There was a disk parallel port detection fix for Speed DOS. This fix also requires a Speed DOS ROM update as well. For MiSTer Main, Zach4223 made a CD fix that affects the PlayStation core. Wallpaper folder name follows config i9 name. On the on-screen display, global volume status is reflected when changed by the keyboard. Martin Donlid implemented unique controller mappings, and selective unique controller mappings were added. For the Auric core, there were tweaks in the PSG by Ramon Martinez. There's tap support and alternate BIOS loading, and support for 4 floppy drives by Flandango, and the framework was updated. And for the ZX Spectrum core, an option for narrow border was added. That's it for other updates. Please also try to support Sorge, the maintainer of the MiSTer project, and other MiSTer developers and contributors on support platforms such as Patreon and Ko-fi. Their hard work allows us to enjoy this amazing project. So that's it for this episode. I provided links to all my sources in the description. Make sure you also check out RetroRGB.com to see my MiSTer news videos in blog form and to get more retro related content. And if possible, support them on Patreon too. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a like, and if you want to see more content like this, hit the subscribe button and its bell icon so you can get notified of future videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you next time.